This was coupled with two very, very important inside leaders, Bob Wilson and Chuck Horngren. These two encouraged us to deepen ourselves, encouraged us to deepen and grow the curriculum. They showed us how to do it, and they always maintained a sense of humor. And I'll give you an example of the level of humor. In the middle of this period, Bob decided that the group he was in should have a new name. It used to be called Operations and Systems Analysis, I think, something like that. So Bob came up with this new name, Decision Sciences. Well, if you know Bob, you know you have to needle Bob. So we went to Chuck. And one of Chuck's hidden traits is people think he's a real mature person. So we goaded Chuck into writing Bob a letter, congratulating him on the new name for his group, but expressing curiosity at the plurality. Wouldn't one science be enough? And he signed it, your friend and colleague, Chuck Horngren, Professor of Accounting. So we all waited to hear what Bob would do about this. Days went by, weeks went by, nothing. So finally one morning, walking into school with Bob, I asked him if anybody ever said anything about the new name. And so he fesses up. He got this terribly annoying, almost insulting letter from Horngren. And it was so out of character. He just couldn't imagine Chuck doing this. But he spent days writing an acidic retort. And finally decided he wouldn't send it because Chuck is too nice a guy. So then I had to calm Bob down and explain to him that this really wasn't Chuck. It was just free riding on Chuck's reputation. Okay. So the third lesson here is there is simply no substitute in these matters for a smart, wise, and good person. And that's where Chuck enters the story. Now, some background. Chuck comes from the heartland. The roadmap is Marquette to Harvard, that's hard to say, to Chicago and back to Marquette. He does cycle. Then to Wisconsin, Milwaukee, back to Chicago, he does cycle. And then to Stanford, where the cycling quit. And he has won numerous awards. And there's been some comment about the Outstanding Educator Award. Okay, let's put this in perspective. The first one ever given was to Chuck Horngren. Right. Now, Chuck was also my advisor. Jerry mentioned this briefly. What he didn't mention was Chuck abandoned me. Just as I started my dissertation, he moved to Stanford. And this was devastating at the time. And what I didn't realize was this was another example of Chuck never passing up a teaching moment. So as the years have gone by, my wife and I have successfully moved 3 children into total independence by using Chuck's trick. When it was time for them to leave, we left town. It works every time. And I just didn't realize at the time the power of this lesson. Now at Stanford, Chuck was instrumental in developing and holding on to an investment strategy where the school went after young people that were trained by programs that the Ford Foundation had dumped enormous amounts of money into, which had, in this Ford program, had a profound impact on business education. And the seed money was in a selected number of doctoral programs. And so Chuck's vision on this was to go after these people and then, if you'll pardon the pun, bet the farm on it. Let them do whatever they want. So that's what Chuck did. And so when this group began to arrive, myself included, what did we do? The first thing we did was we started looking at the doctoral program, and we decided, well, we can throw that out, sort of. So we went to Chuck and we asked him, what do you think? Because lots of people have put a lot of time in this. And he said, do it. Okay? So then Jerry and I are teaching in the MBA core. We went to Chuck and we said, we think we want to throw this out. What do you think? Do it. Then pretty soon, it's about 18 months later, Chuck is in there with us, buried up to his neck along with the two of us, trying to do all of this. Then the next thing that happened is the doctoral students got upset with us, and they went on strike, so to speak. They just actually blasted Bill and me for ruining their lives. And Chuck basically told them that if they wanted to ruin their lives, they could stop listening to us, and the revolt was over. And this is just an example of how Chuck's presence encouraged the things that were going on. Now, eventually, tenure came along, and we started to get on the faculty advisory board. And well, what do we do now at this stage of our life? So we looked at Chuck, and what did we learn from Chuck? There's only one trump in that game. The trump is what's good for the university as a whole. Then as time went on further, we started to notice we were getting old, or older, but Chuck wasn't. Now, part of this is this sociological phenomenon that you become your dad. But what we understood when we looked more closely was Chuck kept investing, and it kept him young. And so throughout this whole period then, the clear pattern that we learned from Chuck was the unrelenting champion of innovation, change, taking a risk, pushing forward, the staunch foe of the status quo. And so that gets us to some more personal comments about Chuck, or it gets me to some more personal comments. He's done magnificent work through the years, and we've been prancing around about some work that collectively we did. Okay, you want to see some real work? Go back to a 62 paper by Chuck and George Sorter, Asset Recognition and Economic Attributes. Read it. Your jaw will drop. It's that good. And reflect on his force for rationality, rigor, and substance that his managerial text has played. Completely changed the way this material is taught, not only at Stanford, but across the country and around the world. And it's even withstood the attack of the mindless activity-based costing advocates. How'd you like that? And from there, go on and think about his stabilizing influence as the US GAAP factory in particular stumbled around trying to find a politically stable way to develop, maintain, and manage the regulations that we now called GAAP, right? When you start looking into the history of that sequence of organizations, you'll find that Chuck played a profound role in putting it all together. And I also want to mention that Chuck has been and continues to be an ever-present mentor and a dear friend. But there's one other thing you should know about Chuck, and that's the invisible part. And